This is Garis Masculist MGTOW flyers, that is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 602, entitled A Masculist Reply to an Email from a 22-year-old Woman. Description. As a masculist, I rarely get correspondence from women. Recently, I got an email from a 22-year-old woman who posed some interesting questions, so I thought it would be interesting to make a flyer/video of my answers to her. Now the flyer itself. A masculist reply to an email from a 22-year-old woman by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. I rarely get feedback from women as a masculist, which makes me wonder why. Are they afraid of me? Do they think I'm so misogynist against masculism's enemies that I'm not worth corresponding with? Is my general status too high to be criticizable, etc.? Recently, I received the following short email from a 22-year-old woman whose reply from me I thought would make a good masculist flyer, since one of the major goals of the masculist is to create a FIP society, and that involves the fipping of women. So the answers I give to her questions might help women to FIP up. Since it's short, I reproduce it here and use it again, cut into its questions that I use as prompts to answer them. I hope the women reading/watching this flyer/video find it interesting and informative. Here is her email. Quote, in female voice. Hello! I hope this email finds you well. I'm sure you get a lot of angry emails. However, this won't be one of them. I come from your article about your distaste for women, and I have a couple of questions out of genuine curiosity. First, I'll give a bit of context. I'm a 22-year-old woman, and for the most part of my life have hated being a woman. For many years of my life, I've dated women and wore men's clothing to escape my woes. This, however, was a band-aid fix. I've been trying to get comfortable acting like a woman and dating normally again. This can be very hard when I have many men in my life that don't think there's anything good about women. It feeds my want to be more like a man. I feel broken by this world, and being a woman, I don't feel I'm deserving of anything sometimes. So here's a couple of questions I have for you. What do you expect from women? Do you want women to be more like men? What can I do to be less like the women you mention in your article? Do you have any life advice for a woman in her early 20s? I hope you find the time to write to me, as I'm interested in your response. Thank you. Tess. That's the end of the quote. I will now break up her email into its questions, answering them one by one. Q. That's question. Hello. I hope this email finds you well. I'm sure you get a lot of angry emails. A. That's my answer. Actually, no. I get almost no correspondence from women, which has puzzled me over several decades of being a masculist. I do wonder why that is, and have some theories why that I mentioned above. Q. I've come from your article about your distaste of women. A. As a masculist, I don't hate all women. For example, I do have a girlfriend whom I care a lot about, with whom I have a LAT, L-A-T, that's living apart together, relationship that keeps the relationship fresh due to its weekly breaks and comings together. But as a masculist, I do have a hatred against those gender criminal women who commit massive gender crimes against men, such as women's manslavery, women's divorce rape, women's forced fathering, etc. These are such horrible, decades-lasting gender crimes against men that such women should be hated and are hated by masculists who aim to wipe out such women from the face of the earth by totally ignoring them, not even pumping and dumping them, so that they die slow, miserable deaths, rotting on the shelf, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless, and utterly rejected, spat at. For example, masculists are at war against fluffies, that is, traditional women who expect to be able to parasite off the labour and money of a man, thus manslaving him and divorce-raping him for decades. Masculists have a particular hatred against these man-slaving, divorce-raping women, are at war against them, aiming to wipe them out, or to force them to convert themselves into FIPs, that's financially independent persons, so that they do not manslave a man for decades of his life. Masculists see fluffy manslavery as 1,000 times bigger problem than was Negro slavery, given the numbers. There are several billion manslaves on the planet now, while there were several million Negro slaves in the 1800s in the US. The core idea of masculism is that it is a rebellion by men against being man-slaves to women, working for a woman for decades of his life. The immorality of Negro slavery was the root cause of the US Civil War. Masculists are abolitionists who view fluffydom as manslavery and manslavery as slavery, and hence hated and a war issue. The masculists aim to wipe out manslavery by wiping out the fluffies, by forcing them to rot on the shelf, by not getting a man, as most men become masculisted in the coming years. This decade is men's decade, as men wake up that they don't have to pay the horrible traditional price of being a man's slave to a woman to get regular sex from her, and then have to work for her for decades, and then, with one chance in four, be butchered in the fluffy feminist hypocrite genocider controlled divorce court system by having his kids ripped away from him with a 90% probability, lose his house to his ex-wife so that she can raise her kids in it, lose half his wealth and stuff to her, be forced to pay for his kids he's barely allowed to see, and if his ex-wife is a real fluffy, be forced to pay her alimony until he dies, with no legal nor moral obligation on her to get off her fat parasitic ass and fib up, so that she continues to parasite off his labour and money after the divorce the way she did before the divorce. Masculists have a hatred of such women and aim to wipe them out. Fluffydom is a war issue to masculists. Q. First, I'll give a bit of context. I'm a 22-year-old woman, and for the most part of my life have hated being a woman. For many years of my life I've dated women and wore men's clothing to escape my woes. This, however, was a band-aid fix. I've been trying to get comfortable acting like a woman and dating normally again. This can be very hard when I have many men in my life that don't think there's anything good about women. It feeds my want to be more like a man. A. This is men's decade, in which men liberate themselves from fluffy parasitism. Feminist mono-consciousness, in brackets, equals, have only had one's feminist consciousness raised and know nothing about how women gender oppress men, close brackets. Hypocrisy and constant misandry, and create a fit society. Men, masculistic men, have good reason to see many women as morally inferior and disparage them. Masculists put powerful moral pressure on women to fib up, to grow up, to take responsibility for their own lives and not expect to parasite off men's money and labour for decades of their lives, thus manslaving them and divorce-raping them as described above. Millions of women force men into undesired fatherhood by lying to their boyfriends/partners/husbands that they are taking the pill when they aren't, get pregnant, then force the father to pay for decades for a kid he doesn't want, a major gender crime in the eyes of masculists. Even worse are women who commit paternity fraud, lying to their man that the kid growing inside him is his when she knows it's not. This is gender criminality on a horrible scale and should be criminalised, similarly with false rape accusations. Masculists want the legislation of the para, that's paternity rejection right, so that men have the same right as women to reject an unwanted pregnancy. The fact that women have the mara and men don't have the para is the greatest gender discrimination that exists, which fills Masculists with a burning hatred against its massive gender injustice. Masculists want the establishment of GECs, that's GECs, Gender Equality Committees, in the parliaments that consist half of female feminists and half of male masculists, so that the gender issues of both sexes are treated equally, which is certainly not the case today. Most feminists are deeply monoconscious and know nothing about how women oppress men, and in fact worse than vice versa. Q. I feel broken by this world and being a woman. I don't feel I'm deserving of anything sometimes. So here's a couple of questions I have for you. What do you expect from women? Do you want women to be more like men? A. As a masculist, I expect women to grow up, to fip up, to become adult, responsible citizens, and not, as feminists childishly do, blame men for all women's problems. As a masculist, I expect women to take responsibility for their own lives and pull their own financial weight. So women have to fip up by bothering to get a career-competent education at high school and college, so that they become FIPs as adults, which is something the manosphere, that in brackets, men on the internet who discuss men's issues, close brackets, estimates that about 80% of women don't do. Thanks to men, women have a life expectancy of 85 years and a career window of half a century, so have a powerful moral duty to be FIPs or be severely punished by masculisted men, who in time will be nearly all men, by not getting one, and thus forced to rot on the shelf, as now a third of middle-aged women do, manless, loveless, childless, and utterly miserable on antidepressant drugs. Thus, for half a century, a woman's role in life is the same as a man's, that is, the careerist role, so that women do not manslave men and thus make themselves hated, by masculists at least. Q. What can I do to be less like the women you mention in your article? Do you have any life advice for a woman in her early 20s? A. Masculists like women who are snurfs, that's S-N-U-R-F-S, that is, slim, nutritive, FIPs. 2/3 of women are either fat or obese, which makes them unfuckable to slim, quality men. Men have always liked the nurtutive abilities of women. It reminds them of when their mothers were nurtutive towards them as small boys. And of course women have to be FIPs, so as not to be manslavers, divorce rapists, and hence hated and destroyed by the masculisted men, most men, in time. So become a snurf and get yourself a man who admires women who pull their weight and who knows how to nurture a man and who does not waddle when she walks. Masculism will convert monoconscious feminazi bigots, that's MFBs, into biconscious feminists, who are much nicer to be with for men, since a biconscious feminist knows how women oppress men, so loses her feminist anger at men for the ways that men oppress women, by having it cancelled by her masculine anger at women for how women oppress men. So, become biconscious by learning masculist ideas, for example, by absorbing the masculist ideas in this flyer/video. As masculism becomes equally powerful in society as feminism, there will be a lot more sanity in the world, and the two sexes can cease their gender war and create equal rights for both sexes and equal obligations as well. Hope this helps. Cheers, Hugo. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Author of the book Masculism, Men's Rebellion Against Being Man's Slaves to Women, an e-textbook of 600 plus masculist flyers for men's studies courses, freely downloadable in Microsoft Word format from my website. Ciao.